Hey folks, welcome back. I'm Justin, the Bristly Innkeeper, and today we're going to be talking about foils and how they are definitely not all the same. So the topic of foils goes all the way back to the 90s when Wizards first started doing it, but we're going to narrow that context to just the most recent sets, and specifically so I can show you the difference in foils between the Japanese printed cards and the American or US printed cards. And for most players, foils are foils. They're bendy, shiny cards, and most people don't even know that there's a difference, but there is, at least to collectors or people like me, significant differences between the Japanese printed foil cards and the American printed foil cards. So let's take a look. Okay, so we've got a sampling of Duskmourn cards, and before I turn this into a little bit of a game for us, a lot of people don't know that cards are printed in different countries. Three of the primary countries of origin are going to be the US, Japan, and Belgium. You can check your booster pack, and every single booster pack will tell you where it's printed. So the first thing that I want to address is where the different types of products are printed. So in general, in your region, and mine may be different, in the United States, we can get bundles, pre-release, collector boosters, and booster boxes. All of the booster boxes that we've been receiving for the last couple of years are Japan printed. All of the bundles, pre-releases, and collector boosters are US printed. So that's where you'll find them. Now, the first thing that I want to show you, I have a bunch of basic foil forests from the new set, and I'm going to show you something. See if you can determine which are which. So there's obviously a difference here. Some are bending back while some are more flat, specifically the ones in the front. And also you should be able to see the ones in front here are a little bit darker on the top, whereas the ones in the back are lighter, right? This isn't a misprint, this isn't a fake card scenario or anything like that. These are just differences in the origin of printing. And my climate may be different, but in general, I have found that the cards will do this. So, which is which? Well, if you've been playing for a while, you know that the Pringles, specifically the ones that bend away from your hand, like this, that bend up, these are US printed. These are US printed. So that's usually the first indicator if you're a collector or you care about this sort of thing. If you want to play with foils, you're not going to want to play with US printed foils. They bend up like this, and there is a way to fix them, but technically it's not permanent. Now, the Japan printed foils are more flat, or you may see them bend with the curvature of your hand a little bit more naturally. So that's the second way to tell. Another thing that I wanted to do is I ordered 4 of these foil Tyvars, and being aware of this difference, I was like, man, I really hope somebody sends me a Japan printed foil so I can use that one for my EDH deck. It may be difficult for you to check on the camera because it's flat and you're not here in person, but I want you to guess which one you think is the Japan printed foil. Just from looking at the cards, see if you can determine if there's a distinct difference between one of them. All right, so I can't wait too long because it's a video, but if you happen to guess this one, which was previously right here, this is the Japan printed foil. Now, of course, one of the reasons I can tell is because it bends up towards the art. It fits the curvature of your hand, right? Whereas the US printed bends away. It bends up like a Pringle. So I was lucky enough that somebody sent me at least one of the JP printed foils, and unfortunately, stores are not going to discern between these differences because they're minute unless you're like a collector like me. One of the things that I want to point out, that which maybe you can't see on camera, but you can see with the forest very clearly, is that the hues tend to be a little bit more yellow with the US printed, right? The US, the Pringle. This is a little bit more yellow. This is a little bit more greenish blue. You should be able to see that, especially with the forest on camera. I'll also show you with a Tyvar here. You should be able to see the one on the left is a little bit more blue tinted, where the one on the right is a little bit more yellow tinted. Another place that you can see that before I even take them out of the little sleeves, is on other cards as well. So can you guess which is which? This is the Japan one. Another place that you can tell that is on white cards. White cards appear particularly yellow, especially in Duskmorn printing for some strange reason. Sometimes they're more white, sometimes they're more yellow, but for US foils, they're quite yellow. And finally, we come to what I think is the most important difference here. And I don't have a very good direct light, so it may be difficult to tell. Maybe you can see the examples here. But the most important difference to me is not necessarily their hue or their bend, although the bend is important, but just the quality of the art and how the foil looks on the card. So we'll look at Tyvar again. Here's the US printing. And I don't have any direct light. This is just ambient light from my windows, right? See if you can notice anything. All right, now let's look at the JP printed one. All right, what were your takeaways before I spoil it for you? Did you even have any, or are these equivalent to you? All right, so I'll go ahead and tell you the differences. So one of the most important differences is in the actual foil texture itself, and you can see this particularly well if you turn the cards at an angle into a very bright light, so it looks white, kind of like that. Here's the texture. In US printed cards, you have this sort of vertical striation that's going on, and in JP printed cards, you have a more grainy, just like dot printing texture. I'm not talking about the rosette pattern, I'm talking about the texture in the foil itself. And this is probably the reason why, in addition to different materials, the JP printed foils appear more prismatic. You definitely get a lot more of the rainbow coloring out of the JP printed foils than you do out of the US printed. And again, maybe it's hard to tell on camera. The US printed, instead of being prismatic, are more just reflective, like actual just silver tinfoil. You still get a little bit of the rainbow effect, but just not nearly as much. You definitely get more with the JP printed. However, one downside to this difference is that the specular highlights, the things that like really pop, don't show up on Japan printed foils, but they do show up on the US. So look at the Planeswalker symbol on the bottom there. You see how it's able to pop at certain rotations? Might be kind of hard to see it. But the Planeswalker symbol very noticeably pops out more on US printed. Had to break for noise. Okay, so his headpiece also pops out a little bit more. Might be difficult to tell. But what I mean by the specular highlights here is this is a very good example on an old Modern Masters card. You see there's certain parts of the art, like the metal, her sleeve right here, that little disc, the armor. The metal pops a lot more than the other art. That's what I mean by the specular highlights, the very flashy parts that should be popping off. Those show up very good on the US cards, but they barely show up on the JP printed cards. JP printed are just more flat in general, but they're more rainbowy. So I hope this show you some of the key differences, especially if you were to manually pick through foils. You can tell whether they're printed in Japan or in the United States or somewhere else, but there are definitely distinct differences, and especially if you are a collector, it will come down to preference, but I find myself leaning more towards the JP foils because they have a lot more of the prismatic effect and they don't bend nearly as much as the US printed cards. My goodness, which is another reason that I don't buy collector boosters, because I don't find the quality of the cards to be very good. So the JP printed foils are only going to come out of the box, which is pretty cool. But if you're a store or just a player who doesn't care about the minutia, these products will be equivalent to you. But I'm glad that I was able to show you some of the differences. So to recap, let's go over some of the basic differences to help you distinguish between JP printed foils and US printed foils. First up, the shape. So Japan printed foils will follow the curvature of your hand, while the US printed will sort of arc, and this is where the term Pringle comes in. It will look like a Pringle chip. Next is the foil texture itself. The Japan printed foil has a sort of dot or grainy texture, while the US printed foils have this sort of vertical striation in the card. When you turn it, it makes it particularly visible when you use a strong light source to see it. And finally, the biggest difference, at least to me in terms of the quality, is how JP printed foils will have a more prismatic look. They will seem like they have more of that prism effect, rainbow effect, if you will, while the US cards will seem more flat and just sort of reflective instead of prismatic. However, with US printed cards, you will notice more specular reflection on highlighted areas in the art, or things like this, the Planeswalker symbol at the bottom, that will pop out more, whereas in the JP printed foils, it'll just seem a little bit more flat. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them below. Tell me what you think of foils in recent sets, especially, even though everybody knows the classic foils are the best. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, help the channel grow. I'm working on the studio right now, and I'm very excited to share future plans with you very soon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.